Hey, this is Jacob Nash, and this is a review of Module 1 for AP Psychology. And here's what I call it, the early dudes and their approaches. That's all you need to think about. So what are the early dudes? Let's see. Oh, yeah, let's talk about this. You got to remember that these three things mean the same thing. School of thought, approach, and perspective. Also, sometimes it says School of Psychology. So if you see School of Psychology, don't think, oh, what college is it talking about? That's not what it means. It means approach or their view on psychology. That's what it means. Okay, very, very early thoughts. What are the super early people? Well, these people, they didn't really know anything for sure. This is just what they wondered. Now we have Buddha in India. Hopefully you've heard of him. He thought or wondered if sensations and perceptions made ideas. And then in China, he thought that ideas in the mind were powerful, and he wondered about it. So, I mean, that's not a very valid thing, but they were just wondering. They didn't have any access to anything that could show them for sure what it meant. And then some Hebrew scholars in Israel, they thought that you thought with your heart. So they that's what they thought. They didn't think that you thought with your brain. They thought that you thought with your heart. So like I said, they didn't have really any access to anything. So sorry, that's not really not those things aren't right. Sorry. Then we have some Greeks. Well, they thought they knew, but they were pretty much wrong as well. Not completely, but let's see. First, we have Socrates and Plato. So Plato was Socrates' student, and Aristotle was Plato's student. But Socrates and Plato, they thought the same thing. They thought that knowledge is innate. Remember that word. Anytime you see a bold word on this slideshow, that means remember it. And names, you need to remember those too, and what they mean. That means that you're born with knowledge. So that's what they thought. They're like, oh, born with knowledge. That's what they thought. And they also thought that the mind was separate from the body and that it continued after death. They're like, oh, well, body dead, but not the mind. And then Aristotle, he was like, no, you guys are dumb. He would say that to his own teacher and grand teacher. He thought that you could only get it from experience. So he also he liked to use observations. Socrates and Plato, they just thought things by logic that they thought they had. They're like, oh, this must be true. But Aristotle, at least he used observations and experiments sometimes. Well, then we have the scientific revolution people. Well, let's first talk about Rene Descartes. You might think Descartes or Descartes, but no, sorry, he was French, so that's not what you say. He agreed with Socrates and Plato. So remember, they thought innate. So he also thought that the mind and body were separate. And since they were separate, he was like, well, they're separate, but they have to be connected. So he thought, okay, well, this is how it is. Your mind goes to your nerves, then your muscles, then your body. That's how he thought they were connected. Goes to the nerves, goes to the muscles, goes to the body. He also thought that animal brain had animal spirits. He one day just randomly got an animal brain from somewhere, and he was like, I think it has animal spirits. Oh, now what? We have two other people. Let's talk about Francis Bacon. He's the one that he's eating bacon, even though he's just eating it without using his hands. He needs to learn manners. He believed in using the scientific method. And in fact, he helped to create it, but he wasn't the original creator, really, for psychology. Now, he also thought that superstition was only a result of humans neglecting their era. So he's like, well, they only think that because they're just not even thinking about that they're not saying things right. And that's what he said in his Novum Organum. Now, John Locke, maybe you've heard of him because he did a lot of political things, but apparently he did science things too. He wrote something called Essay Concerning Human Understanding. And he stated, similar to Aristotle, that the mind is a tabula rasa, or basically empty of knowledge at birth. So he agrees with Aristotle. He's like, no, knowledge is not innate. You have a tabula rasa when you're born, blank slate. And the only way to unrasa it is by experience. And that's similar to Aristotle. But so sorry, all these people, they really didn't know that much because they didn't do that much to test what they thought. Until we have, not yet, sorry. Empiricism. This is the sort of like Locke Aristotle idea that only experience can make a person have knowledge. Sorry, that's not correct grammar. So see this guy, let's say he just was born and he just walked around and he saw a tree and he figured out how it grows, and then he says he's not dumb now. That's empiricism. Oh, alert. Remember Tim Allen. Maybe you don't think these two people look alike, but I think they do. The first one is, well, it's not Wundt. For some reason, you have to say Wundt because it's German. He's German. So we have to say Wundt. We have to respect the Germans and say their right things. But you got to remember this guy or you will fail. You want to know me or you will fail. But really, it would be pronounced you want to know me, but too bad. So there you go. Remember that guy. Not that guy. That's Santa Claus Tim Allen. Remember that one that looks like a very old man that, I don't know, maybe he's wise. Let's see. Who was that guy? Oh, the father of psychology. What class are we taking? Oh yeah, AP Psychology. So you have to know that. So he, in December 1879, you gotta remember that, he made the first psychology lab. And that made some of the people around there go crazy. They're like, "Oh, you can't do that!" Like sometimes the very religious people back then, they thought that that's not something you should try to study. But he was like, "Cool, Brad." So he did it anyways. Here's the audio of what he first did. Oh, I guess he somehow spoke English that day.
We're completely told of things. When you hear the ball hit the typewriter, then when you're conscious of hearing the ball hit the typewriter.
So maybe you couldn't tell what he was saying because that's kind of glitchy back then in 1879. But he's trying to do two different things. The first thing, he has some person sitting by a typewriter. He's going to hit a ball on a platform and he'll say, "When you hear that thing, hit that typewriter right now." And when they did that, usually it took about 1/10 of a second for them to do that. But when he said, "Don't do it until you're aware of yourself hearing it," you might think that's the same thing, but it's not. It took 2/10 of a second. It was a little bit longer. So he was doing some experiments, and those other people back then, the Greeks, the very early people, the scientific revolution people, or revolution, sorry, they just didn't, they weren't able to figure out that much because they didn't actually test their ideas. But he did. Oh, notable Wundt alumni. Here are people that were his students. So, two that you need to remember. Stanley Hall. Stanley Hall, he's important because he was the first person to get a psychology PhD. No one else had done that. Obviously, they had gotten PhDs, but not a psychology one. And he was the first APA president. American Psychological Association is what that stands for. Another one, Edward Titchener. He's a little bit more important. We're going to talk about him because he made something very important. Now, atoms of the mind. Wundt called simple mental processes atoms of the mind. So that's what he would call it. All right, now Titchener. He created something which is a school of thought, approach, or perspective, however you would say it. And it was called Structuralism. And it was based off of Wundt's things. So technically Wundt would agree with this, but they developed structuralism, and this was the first psychology approach. Like I said, here's what it meant, and this isn't exactly Titchener, but this is pretty much what he thought. We need to consider each part of the mind separately to study the structure of it. We need to use introspection to do so. So he's thinking separately to study the structure. And he needs to use introspection. What's that? Oh, it's having patients say how they felt. So they're like, what do you feel like? Like he slaps them in the face or whatever. And think about that introspection, like an inspection inside you. Titchener and C.S. Lewis, he's another guy. They said you know the most about yourself than anything in the universe. That's what they truly thought. But so sorry, bad idea. Patients can't say how they feel effectively. They don't always know, so too bad. All right, well, that's in the trash can. Well, not exactly, but let's talk about something else now. William James and functionalism. Oh, there's James. He looks like some wise man, right? Okay, what did he think? Well, he thought functionalism. This was another one. And he's like, dummy, no, you don't look at things separately. You look at them as a whole or together. So that's the difference. Looking at things together and how they work together, how they function together. James, he was based off of Darwin. We're going to talk more about him in module 2. But if you remember Darwin, he was that evolution guy. So he thought people's things in their mind are the way they are due to natural selection and the need for survival of generation. So they're like, the people that had dumb things going on, they died. The ones that didn't, they kept going on, and that gene was successful, so it just kept going into people. That's how he believed it to work. All right, well, let's talk about some students that he had. Well, he had a lot of students, but let's just talk about 2 that both happen to be women. Let's see. Mary Calkins. Well, she should have gotten a PhD, but Harvard was dumb and they denied it just because she was a woman. And they gave her a Radcliffe one. So hopefully you know who that is, Daniel Radcliffe. That's how you remember. For women only. So she was like, that's stupid. So trash can. Daniel Radcliffe in the trash can. So yeah, that's how it was. When she tried to join James's class, all of the boy students dropped out because they're dumb. And I mean, even in the classrooms, if she was going to be in there, she would have to be far away from them. That's just how dumb it was then. But she didn't end up getting her PhD, so sorry about that. But she did become a American Psychological Association president, one of the first women ones. Now, Margaret Washburn, she was another one. Luckily, she did get it. So she was the first one that was a woman to get a psychology PhD. Remember, the first male was Stanley Hall. She became a APA president also, and she wrote something called The Animal Mind that was based off of functionalism. Oh, first psychology textbook ever, so cool. It was called Principles of Psychology, and it was by James. He was like, oh, just give me 1 year, 2 years to write it. He told the people that, but then he was like, oh, sorry, it took 12 years. And Henry Holt published it. All right. Okay, well, bye, James. Now we're talking about something else now. Freudian psychology. This was what Sigmund Freud thought. And same thing like with Titchener. It's not exactly what it said, but this is pretty much the gist of what he thought. Thought processes might be a result from childhood experiences. Also, we need to focus on the unconscious mind to discover psychology. Okay, so those are the 2 things. How do childhood experiences relate to the way people are now, and this unconscious mind? Unconscious mind doesn't mean, oh, I'll just knock you out with a golf club and then we'll see what it's like. No, it's things that you do without even thinking. Sometimes maybe you're so used to doing something that you try to do it, and then you're like, wow, I didn't even really think about doing that. Like if let's say you every morning you go downstairs to get a drink of water, but you randomly weren't thirsty one morning, but you still went down there. I don't know. That might not be a good example, but just something that you do without thinking. He used the psychodynamic approach that we're going to talk about more later, measuring unconsciousness. Watson and Skinner, these are two bad boys, but they had something that might have been something to think about, but a lot of people didn't like them because of something they did, and I'll talk about what they did. These two thought that Freud's ways were dumb, and they said, how could you observe an unconscious mind? You can't even. So they made something called behavioralism, and they were like, everything must be observable or it's just done. You can't even do anything with that. You have to be able to observe it. And you need to examine behaviors specifically. Now, they did something called conditioning, and it was repeating things for reinforcement. So just kind of getting things to be the way they want for a certain purpose. Let's talk about this guy on the left. Does he look like he's nice? Well, let's see what you think about this. He convinced a random single mother to drop off her kid, Albert, and be there at his lab like it was a daycare. Little did she know what he would do when she's gone. He would show that kid a mouse, and the kid liked the mouse, or a rat, I should say. The kid liked the rat, but, and I should say that actually this kid was 18 months old. So he would show the kid the rat, and the kid liked the rat, but he would bang a piece of metal behind the kid and make him think that the rat did that. He would do it over and over so that this kid was eventually scared of the rat. The kid wasn't scared of the rat at first, only after the kid thought, oh, that rat must be making that loud noise. And he scared that kid and made it cry over and over. That's conditioning, and bad boy. He found out things, but bad boy. What about this guy? You might think, oh, he couldn't have done something like that. Well, he kind of put his daughter in a box and tried to put her in there alone for 7 days. And by day 4, he was pretty much forced by his workmates to end the experiment because they were like, we're going to report you, Skinner. And so those are the two things they did. And the reason why he was trying to do that, he was trying to see, is it necessary for humans to have contact with others? And he was just trying to see. And and examine her behaviors. And of course, it did not go well. The kid was very distressed. She was 2 years old, so bad, but that's what they did. Oh, 2 other people, they're better. Rogers and Maslow. Well, they disagree with Freud and these guys. They said that humans just naturally need love and acceptance so that they can become their best selves. They also thought that you should look at present events rather than the past. This was humanistic psychology. All right, well, then there's something called the cognitive revolution. This is where these were the people that disagreed with Watson and Skinner's behavioralism. And they decided to study cognitive neuroscience, or the ability for people to remember things or their internal thoughts. By definition, so you need to know psychology by definition. You might just have some kind of thoughts on that, but it might not actually be what it is. There's 2 things that you need to know. It's the study of behavior and mental processes. And then behavior is something that someone does, and mental process is an internal experience. Quick wrap up. So we got to remember these 6 things. Structuralism, Wundt and Titchener. Functionalism, James, based off of Darwin. Freudian, and psychodynamic. That's Freud, obviously. And then behavioralism, Watson and Skinner. Humanistic, Rogers and Maslow, and the cognitive revolution. And yeah, we need to know what they thought. Don't remember, then rewatch the video. Oh, here's some questions. Let's see. Do we know? What did the early Skinnerians, how did the early Skinnerians view internal thoughts and feelings when explaining behavior? So you might say, Skinnerians, what's that? Oh, remember Skinner, the guy that made his kid in a box without people for a few days? That's who it is. Remember, the behavioralist. Well, I'll stop for a second and you think about it, and I'll show the answer in a second. Oh, well, they thought that internal thoughts and feelings cannot be observed, but behavior can. And they also thought, or they didn't accept thoughts because they can't be observed. So that's basically what they thought. So yeah, you can just pause the video when, yeah. Okay, identify the perspective that James B. Watson helped pioneer. Oh, remember that was that glasses guy that seems like he's nice, but he's not because he bangs metal behind a baby. Oh, he helped pioneer behaviorism. Wilhelm Wundt scientific research would study on the focus of, pause. Oh, conscious or aware experiences. Okay. How did Wilhelm Wundt and his students gather information concerning human thinking and behavior? Do you remember what things they did? They would gather information by creating an experimental apparatus, which they tested, and they would just test reactions to a ball hitting a platform. Now, I didn't mention the apparatus, but that's what you consider it. Their experimental apparatus was that experiment. But that's what it mentions in Meyer's textbook, which you probably use. All right, I identify the early school of psychology that focused on adaptive thinking and consciousness in order to meet our goals. Adaptive thinking, consciousness. Oh, that was functionalism. All right. Which psychological approach researches the importance of love and acceptance needs? Oh, those two nice grandpas. Who are they? Oh, well, it said which approach. So humanistic psychology, but that was Rogers and Maslow. Define psychology. Oh, remember the two things you can't just say, it's brain stuff or something like that. You can't just say that. You have to say, oh, that's out of order. Okay, let's just go back to that then. What technique was used by structuralists to research the elements of experience? Elements of experience? Oh, they used introspection. Remember? That was that thing where it's like, how do you feel? Which philosopher proposed that nerve pathways allow for reflexes? Nerves. I remember that about some guy. He might have had a name that seemed like it had S's in it that you don't say. Oh yeah, Rene Descartes. Which philosopher coined the term tabula rasa? Remember that empty brain at birth, blank slate. Oh yeah, that was John Locke. What did Wilhelm Wundt's first psychological laboratory research? And what do you know? It's the reaction time between hearing a ball and pressing a button. Now let me take away that thing right here. I'll just put it over there. Psychology by definition is the science of behavioral and mental processes. Sorry about that, that's a glitch. Well, you know, that's the end of the lesson. So I hope you like this. I hope you like 84 more. Hopefully I can do them. But there you go.